نحمده ونصلي على رسوله الكريم. One of the important aspects of Iyyaka na'budu is that we realize that various things will be required from us in various times, and some things will be more important than others. At any given time, a person may have the option to do more than one particular act, and all of those acts may seem virtuous, rewarding, and appropriate at the time. However, they will not all be equal, not necessarily. So to do that act which is required at that time is also part of worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What happens is that because there are some deterrents that have been attached to us, shaitan is constantly working, our own nafs is constantly working against us. So their effort will always be to bring us to an act which is also perhaps good, but not as rewarding. If shaitan cannot take us away from a good act altogether, then he'll take us to a less rewarding act. And one of the challenges in this submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that we make sure that the submission is exclusively to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, we are doing only that which Allah azza wa jal wants us to do at that given time. So this is a whole branch of ilm, you can say, which is referred to as maratibul a'mal, the levels, the varying levels of deeds. And when a person understands what they are supposed to do in a given circumstance, this is actually the true understanding of deen. The true understanding of deen, it comes in when a person has the knowledge and the understanding to do what is required when it is required, and to do the best thing at that particular time. This is one aspect of it. The other aspect is that because the worship is exclusively for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it revolves around Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then the slave should not be looking for an immediate sense of gratification or pleasure or enjoyment during that worship. What that means is that sometimes when a person is doing the act of worship, they are extremely devoted, focused, and they are enjoying it. Sometimes a person stands up in salat and they are really enjoying that salat because their heart and mind is in that salat. They are truly benefiting. They feel like they are really communicating with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sometimes when a person is making dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they really feel like they're connecting with Allah azza wa jal. Same thing happens when doing dhikr. Sometimes the same thing happens when performing other good deeds. But other times that sense of satisfaction that comes from the ibadah is not there. That personal sort of enjoyment and pleasure that comes from ibadah, sometimes a person doesn't feel it. And then we are prone to becoming disheartened. Oh, I pray, but I don't feel it. Somebody says, I make dua, but I don't feel it. I do dhikr of Allah, but I don't feel it. What does it mean? They're not feeling that pleasure, that enjoyment, as is called, that lutf that is felt in worship. So sometimes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will allow us to taste that pleasure, and sometimes our heart will not open up to that pleasure. It does not mean that the worship is any less. It does not mean that the value of the worship is any less, nor does it mean that we're not achieving the objective of that worship. But sometimes the heart opens up to certain emotions and sometimes it does not. As long as we're doing the right thing. Yes, if a person is standing in salat and completely distracted, they're thinking of something else, and then they say, I'm not enjoying my worship, well then there's another cause, there's a direct cause there that needs to be addressed. But a person is applying their mind and their heart, and they're doing everything exactly in the right way, and they're still not getting that feeling. This should not be a source of discouragement. Why? Because the worship that was for Allah was done, for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as far as my own enjoyment of that, that's a secondary thing. That could be looked at as a byproduct, could be looked at as a result. But that's not, I don't worship Allah so that I am pleased. I don't worship Allah so that I enjoy. I worship Allah because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who deserves to be worshipped. And in the words of one shaykh, when people go on this pattern of just doing what is enjoyable, then there are a couple of things that happen. The first thing is you will find them very inconsistent in any act of ibadah. You will find them inconsistent. Because when it doesn't have that feeling, then they'll turn to something else to get that feeling, and they'll turn to something else, and they'll turn to something else. So you'll see them bouncing around between activities, trying to find that activity that gives them pleasure, but their direction is incorrect. The second thing is that who are we worshipping? Who are we the abd of? Are we the abd of our own lutf, or are we the abd of al-latif? And that's what he says, you are a abd of al-latif, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're not abd of lutf, you're not a slave to your own pleasure and your own enjoyment of that worship. So these were two aspects that we discussed today. One is to understand and try to learn more about which acts are required when, and to do them at that time when they are most rewarding or most required. This is a part of exclusively worshipping and serving Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the other aspect is that whether we feel the pleasure and enjoyment of ibadah or we don't, our ibadah needs to be consistent, because it is He that we are worshipping. It is not ourselves. Our pursuit is of Him. We are pursuing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through these endeavors of worship. We are not pursuing our own enjoyments. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the realities of this. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala nabina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi.
فتهدي الضياء لها